1. The question most people never ask. What if the thing you've been trying hardest to control was never actually yours to control? Think about it. Most people spend their lives trying to control everything: their future, their reputation, other people's opinions, and even how life unfolds. But nearly 2,000 years ago, Stoic thinkers like Aurelius and Seneca noticed something strange. The more people tried to control life, the more anxious and frustrated they became. So they asked a question most people never stop to ask. Not, how can I control everything? But something far more powerful. What actually belongs within my control? And what never did? If this kind of ancient wisdom interests you, practical ideas that people have reflected on for centuries. Subscribe to Legacy of Thinkers, where we explore timeless philosophy and how it may apply to modern life. Because once you begin asking this question, you may start seeing your problems in a completely different way. And the Stoics believed that this simple shift in perspective could change how a person experiences life itself. 2. The Stoic discovery. The Stoics made a discovery that feels almost too simple at first, and yet it changes everything once you really sit with it. They believed that human suffering often grows from confusion, not just pain itself, but confusion about where our power begins and where it ends. Seneca, one of the clearest Stoic voices, taught that some things are up to us, and some things are not. That was not a poetic line to impress people. It was a practical tool for daily life. Your judgment is yours. Your choices are yours. Your effort is yours. Your values are yours. The way you respond to difficulty is yours. But outcomes are not fully yours. Other people's opinions are not yours. Their loyalty, their moods, their approval, their honesty, none of that belongs to your control. The past is not yours to edit. The future is not yours to command. And this is where the Stoic discovery becomes so powerful. Most people exhaust themselves trying to manage what was never theirs. They try to control how they are perceived. They try to guarantee success. They try to force clarity out of uncertain situations. They try to make other people act with fairness, maturity, or love. But the Stoics would say, this is where inner chaos begins. Because every time you demand control over what is unstable, you hand your peace over to something outside yourself. The Stoic path asks for something harder, but also freer. It asks you to return your attention to the only place where your strength is real: your own mind, your own character, your own decisions. That does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean giving up. It means learning the difference between action and attachment. You still prepare. You still speak honestly. You still work hard. You still love deeply. But you stop believing that your peace must depend on the result. That is the shift. The Stoics did not promise a painless life. They offered something more realistic, a steadier one. Not by controlling the world, but by no longer asking the world to obey you before you allow yourself to be calm. 3. Why control becomes a trap. Control becomes a trap the moment we confuse influence with ownership. At first, it feels reasonable. You want stability. You want clarity. You want to prevent pain before it reaches you. So you begin trying to manage every variable around you, every conversation, every reaction, every possible outcome. You rehearse what to say. You replay what already happened. You try to predict what might go wrong before it does. And for a while, this can even look like intelligence. It can look like responsibility. It can look like maturity. It can look like being prepared. But underneath it, something else is quietly growing: fear. Because when your peace depends on controlling what was never fully yours, peace becomes fragile. It starts breaking every time reality refuses to cooperate. Someone misunderstands you. A plan falls apart. A person you trusted changes. An opportunity disappears. A future you imagined doesn't arrive. And suddenly, Your emotional state is no longer rooted in who you are. It is being dragged around by whatever happens next. This is why the Stoics saw control, in the wrong form, as a hidden prison. Not because action is bad, not because planning is useless, but because attachment to control turns every uncertainty into a threat. You stop living in the present moment. You start negotiating with imaginary futures. You start fighting conversations that haven't happened. You begin resisting life before life even touches you. And that resistance is exhausting. The trap is not that you care. The trap is that you begin to believe that caring means controlling. That love means preventing loss. That wisdom means predicting every outcome. That strength means never being surprised. But life does not work that way. There is always uncertainty. There is always risk. There is always another human being with a mind you cannot command. The more you deny this, the more tension you create inside yourself. The Stoic insight is not harsh. It is freeing. You can act without trying to dominate reality. You can prepare without worshiping certainty. You can care deeply without demanding guarantees. Because the moment you stop asking life to obey you, you make space for something stronger than control, steadiness. And that steadiness is what keeps a person grounded when plans fail, when people disappoint, and when life refuses to move according to script. 4. The Stoic shift. The Stoic shift begins with a quiet realization. The world does not need to change for you to become steadier. For many people, this idea feels uncomfortable at first. We are taught that strength means shaping life exactly the way we want it. We are told that success means controlling outcomes, preventing mistakes, and avoiding uncertainty. But Stoic thinkers saw strength differently. To them, strength was not about forcing the world to cooperate. It was about developing a mind that remains balanced even when the world does not cooperate. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Instead of asking, "How do I control what happens next?" the Stoic begins asking, "How do I respond well to whatever happens next?" That small change in focus moves your attention from external events to internal character. You still plan carefully. You still take responsibility. You still pursue goals with dedication. But your sense of stability no longer depends on whether the outcome unfolds exactly as you hoped. Consider the difference. When control becomes the goal, every uncertainty feels threatening. Every unexpected turn becomes a problem to resist. The mind stays tense, constantly scanning the horizon for what might go wrong. But when response becomes the focus, uncertainty loses much of its power. You recognize that not every situation can be predicted, but every situation can be met with clarity and intention. This is the heart of the Stoic shift. Life continues to bring surprises. Plans still change. People still behave in ways we cannot fully anticipate. None of that disappears. What changes is the position from which you meet those moments. Instead of reacting from frustration, you respond from perspective. Instead of demanding certainty, you practice readiness. Instead of trying to control the entire story, you concentrate on playing your part with integrity. Over time, this approach builds a different kind of confidence. Not the confidence that life will always go according to plan, but the confidence that you can remain steady even when it doesn't. And according to the Stoics, that quiet steadiness is far more powerful than control. 5. A modern example. To understand how this Stoic perspective works in everyday life, imagine a situation that many people have experienced. Daniel had spent months preparing for an opportunity at work. He had invested long evenings refining a proposal, organizing data, and rehearsing how he would present his ideas. For him, the project represented more than just a professional task. It represented progress, recognition, and a sense that his effort was finally moving his career forward. When the day of the presentation arrived, everything seemed ready. But during the meeting, something unexpected happened. A senior manager redirected the conversation toward a different direction, and the proposal Daniel had carefully prepared was only briefly discussed. By the end of the meeting, the decision had shifted toward another approach. On the surface, it might seem like a small disappointment, but for Daniel, it felt much larger. His mind immediately started replaying the event. He wondered if he had said something wrong. He imagined what he could have done differently. He worried about how others in the room had perceived him. This is the moment where the Stoic perspective becomes relevant. In situations like this, many people instinctively try to control what cannot be changed anymore. They revisit the past repeatedly, searching for a version of events that no longer exists. But a Stoic approach asks a different question. Instead of asking, "How do I control what already happened?" the Stoic mindset asks, "What part of this situation still belongs to me?" For Daniel, several things still remained within his influence. He could choose how he interpreted the experience. He could learn from the feedback that emerged during the meeting. He could decide whether the disappointment would discourage him or motivate him to improve. The outcome of the meeting was no longer his to change, but his response to the situation still was. This distinction might seem small, yet it changes the emotional weight of the moment. When someone believes their worth depends entirely on the outcome, disappointment easily turns into frustration or self-doubt. But when someone focuses on effort, character, and learning, the same situation becomes information rather than defeat. The Stoics did not expect people to feel nothing when plans failed. They simply encouraged a different focus, one that allows a person to move forward instead of becoming trapped in what cannot be undone. In modern life, this shift often appears in quiet ways. It shows up when someone accepts uncertainty without losing motivation. It appears when a person continues working with patience instead of reacting with bitterness. Over time, these small choices build resilience. And resilience, more than control, is often what allows people to navigate complex and unpredictable lives. 6. The Stoic practice. The Stoic practice is not complicated, but it requires consistency. It begins with a simple daily habit, noticing the difference between what belongs to your control and what does not. Many Stoic writers suggested beginning the day with a brief moment of reflection. Before the noise of responsibilities, messages, and expectations arise, you pause and ask yourself a quiet question. What will I likely face today, and how do I want to respond to it? You might encounter disagreement. You might experience delays. You might meet people who are stressed, distracted, or impatient. The Stoics believed these possibilities were not reasons for frustration, but reminders to prepare the mind. When you recognize that difficulties are part of ordinary life, they lose some of their power to surprise you. And when something unexpected happens, the Stoic practice invites you to pause for a moment before reacting. Not to suppress emotion, and not to pretend nothing matters, but to create a small space between the event and your response. In that space, you regain perspective. You remember that while you cannot control every situation, you still guide your character. You still choose your words. You still decide whether your reaction will come from frustration or from understanding. This is where the Stoic practice quietly reshapes daily life. It turns ordinary moments into opportunities for discipline. It turns setbacks into reminders to strengthen patience. And it slowly builds a kind of inner stability that does not depend on everything going according to plan. Over time, this approach becomes less of a technique and more of a way of seeing the world. You begin to notice that many struggles become lighter when you stop demanding that reality match your expectations. You begin to recognize that calm is not something life gives you, it is something you cultivate. And perhaps that is the most practical lesson the Stoics left behind. Not a promise that life will become easy, but a reminder that steadiness is something we can practice, one day at a time. If this reflection resonated with you, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to continue exploring ideas like this, Subscribe to Legacy of Thinkers. If this reflection resonated with you, continue the practice tomorrow.